The harsh summer sun beat down mercilessly on Abigail Coleman as she watched the last passenger coach pull away from Rattlesnake Junction, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust in its wake, and her stranded at a lonely train depot in the middle of nowhere. The year was 1878, and what was supposed to be a simple journey to visit her aunt in Santa Fe had turned into a nightmare when her purse containing her ticket for the connecting train had been snatched by a quick-handed thief just moments before boarding. Abigail sank onto the hard wooden bench of the depot platform, her emerald green travel dress collecting dust as she contemplated her predicament. The station master had been less than sympathetic, informing her that the next train wouldn't arrive until the following afternoon, and the nearest town was 5 miles east. With no money for lodging and no one to contact, she was utterly alone. "I'll just wait," she had told the station master with as much dignity as she could muster. "Someone will come for me." It was a lie, of course. Nobody knew she was stranded here. Her aunt wasn't expecting her until tomorrow evening. As the hours crawled by, the station master locked up the small depot office and tipped his hat. "Closing up now, miss. You'd best find somewhere else to wait. Not safe for a young lady alone after dark." "I'll be fine," Abigail insisted, though she felt anything but fine. At 22, she had never been in such a vulnerable position. Born and raised in Philadelphia's respectable society, she had always been protected. But her parents' unexpected death 6 months ago had left her with few options and even fewer funds. The station master shrugged and departed, leaving Abigail alone on the platform as the afternoon sun began its descent behind the distant mountains. The once bustling depot fell eerily quiet. Only the occasional whistle of wind through the wooden slats and the distant howl of a coyote broke the silence. Abigail watched as the sky transformed from brilliant blue to a canvas of orange and pink. Under different circumstances, she might have found the sunset beautiful. Now, it only signaled the approaching night and unknown dangers. She clutched her small carpet bag tighter against her chest, containing the few possessions she had managed to keep with her. Just as darkness fully enveloped the depot, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart race. She stood quickly, scanning the darkness, unsure whether to hide or call for help. The steady rhythm grew louder until a horse and rider materialized from the shadows. The silhouette of a man atop a powerful stallion appeared against the darkening horizon. As he approached, she could make out the broad shoulders beneath a worn leather duster, the wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, and the unmistakable shape of a revolver holstered at his hip. "Evening, madam," came a deep voice as the stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. "Station's closed." "I'm aware," Abigail replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her fear. The man stepped into the faint light cast by the single lantern hanging from the depot's overhang. He was tall, at least 6 feet, with a face weathered by sun and wind. A several-day growth of beard shadowed his strong jaw, and beneath the brim of his hat, she caught the gleam of piercing blue eyes assessing her. "Ethan Eastwood," he introduced himself, removing his hat briefly to reveal dark hair streaked with gold from the sun. "You seem to be in a spot of trouble." "Abigail Coleman," she returned with a nod, relieved to find his manner more courteous than threatening. "My purse was stolen before I could board my connecting train. The next one doesn't arrive until tomorrow afternoon." Ethan's gaze swept over the empty platform, then back to her face. "You planning to sit in this depot till dark?" He glanced up at the night sky, already dotted with the first evening stars. "Well, I reckon it's already dark." Abigail lifted her chin, determined not to appear as desperate as she felt. "I have nowhere else to go." Ethan considered her for a long moment, then a small smile softened his rugged features. "Madam, I can offer you a place to stay for the night. My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe." Suspicion flared in Abigail's mind. A young woman alone accepting the invitation of a strange man was precisely the kind of situation her mother had warned her about. "That's very kind, Mr. Eastwood, but I couldn't possibly impose." "Not an imposition," he assured her. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Torres, lives at the ranch. You'll have a proper chaperone." As if sensing her continued hesitation, he added, "You'll see home before the stars do tomorrow. I give you my word." Something in his steady gaze made Abigail believe him. Besides, what choice did she have? Stay alone at an abandoned depot all night, vulnerable to whatever dangers lurked in the darkness? "Thank you," she finally said. "I accept your offer." Ethan nodded, then stepped forward to take her carpetbag. "Juniper here is gentle," he said, patting the neck of his chestnut stallion. "But she's strong enough to carry us both until we reach the ranch." Before Abigail could respond, he had secured her bag and was helping her up onto the horse's back. His hands were strong but careful as they encircled her waist, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. Once she was settled, he swung up behind her with practiced ease. "Hold on," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. Abigail found herself enveloped in the warmth of his body, the clean scent of leather and pine surrounding her. As they set off into the night, she was acutely aware of the strength in the arms that bracketed her, keeping her secure in the saddle. The moon rose higher in the sky, casting silvery light across the rugged landscape as they rode. Ethan didn't speak much, but his presence was reassuring rather than threatening. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks, a rock formation that resembled a sleeping giant, a cluster of cacti that flowered only at night, the distant outline of mountains against the star-studded sky. "Have you lived here long?" Abigail asked, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Born and raised," Ethan replied. "My father established the ranch 30 years ago, came west with nothing but dreams and determination, built it into something worth having before he passed." "I'm sorry for your loss," Abigail said softly. "Been 5 years now," Ethan said. "Life out here teaches you to move forward. What about you? What brings a young woman like yourself to this part of the territory alone?" Abigail hesitated, then decided there was no harm in sharing her story. "My parents died 6 months ago. Fever took them both within days of each other. I'm traveling to Santa Fe to live with my aunt." "That's a hard road," Ethan commented, his voice gentle. "Losing family always is." "Yes," Abigail agreed, surprised by the understanding in his tone. "I've never been west before. Everything is so vast here, so untamed," Ethan chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest against her back. "That's why I love it. There's freedom in the wildness." Just as Abigail was about to respond, Ethan suddenly pulled Juniper to a halt. His body tensed behind her and his hand moved to the revolver at his hip. "What is it?" she whispered, alarm coursing through her. "Riders," Ethan replied quietly. "Could be nothing, could be trouble, out here. Best to assume the latter until proven otherwise." In the distance, Abigail could now make out the sound of multiple horses approaching. Ethan guided Juniper off the trail and into a cluster of juniper trees, their branches providing cover in the darkness. "Stay quiet," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. They watched as a group of 5 riders passed along the trail they had just left. Even in the moonlight, Abigail could see that these men were rough-looking, with unkempt appearances and weapons prominently displayed. "Wilkes' gang," Ethan explained once the riders had passed. "Been terrorizing these parts for months. Stagecoach robberies mostly, but they're not above hurting innocent folks." A shiver ran through Abigail. "Is that who stole my purse at the depot?" "Unlikely. They prefer bigger targets, probably just a petty thief passing through." Ethan guided Juniper back onto the trail. "Still, it's good we crossed paths when we did. I don't like to think of you alone at that depot with men like that roaming about." The rest of the journey passed without incident, and eventually, Abigail spotted lights in the distance. As they drew closer, a substantial ranch house came into view with several smaller outbuildings surrounding it. A lantern burned in the window, casting a welcoming glow. "Eastwood Ranch," Ethan announced with a note of pride in his voice. Not much to look at compared to Eastern standards, but it's home. To Abigail's eyes, exhausted from travel and tension, it looked like paradise. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. As they approached, the door opened, and an older woman with silver-streaked dark hair appeared in the doorway. "Senor Ethan, we were beginning to worry," she called, then paused when she noticed Abigail. "And who is this, Mrs. Torres? This is Miss Abigail Coleman," Ethan explained as he helped Abigail down from the horse. "She was stranded at Rattlesnake Junction. She needs a place to stay until tomorrow's train." Mrs. Torres's weathered face softened into a smile. "Of course, come in, come in. You must be exhausted, poor child." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. Simple furnishings crafted from local wood created a rustic but welcoming atmosphere. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the aroma of something delicious lingered in the air. "Have you eaten, Mrs. Torres asked, already leading Abigail toward the kitchen. "Not since this morning," Abigail admitted, suddenly aware of her hunger. "Then sit. I have stew keeping warm." Mrs. Torres bustled about, ladling hearty beef stew into a bowl and cutting thick slices of fresh bread. "Eat, eat. You're too thin." Ethan joined them after seeing to his horse, washing up at a basin near the door before taking a seat across from Abigail. Mrs. Torres served him as well, then sat down with a cup of tea, her dark eyes watching with satisfaction as they ate. The stew was the most delicious thing Abigail had tasted in months, rich with vegetables and tender beef. She hadn't realized just how hungry she was until the first spoonful passed her lips. "This is wonderful, Mrs. Torres," she said sincerely. "An old family recipe," the housekeeper replied with obvious pleasure. "My grandmother taught it to my mother, who taught it to me." As they ate, Ethan explained Abigail's situation more fully to Mrs. Torres. The older woman clucked sympathetically. "The world can be a cruel place for a young woman alone," she said. "You were fortunate, Senor Ethan found you." "I was," Abigail agreed, glancing at the cowboy. In the warm light of the kitchen, she could see his features more clearly. Despite the weathered quality of his skin and the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against the sun, she realized he wasn't as old as she'd first thought, perhaps 30 at most. After the meal, Mrs. Torres showed Abigail to a small but comfortable guest room upstairs. This was Senor Ethan's sister's room before she married and moved to Colorado, the housekeeper explained as she placed a lantern on the bedside table. "There are clean linens in the chest, and I've put out a nightgown you can use." "You're very kind," Abigail said, touched by the hospitality of these strangers. Mrs. Torres patted her hand. "It is nothing. Get some rest now. Morning comes early on a ranch." Alone in the room, Abigail changed into the borrowed nightgown and slipped between the cool sheets of the bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come immediately. She lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft hooting of an owl, the creaking of the house as it settled. Her thoughts drifted to Ethan Eastwood. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength and dignity that she found herself admiring. He had rescued her without hesitation, asking nothing in return. Men like that were rare in her experience. When sleep finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with endless skies and a pair of blue eyes that seemed to see right through to her soul. Morning arrived with the crowing of a rooster and the tantalizing aroma of coffee and bacon. Abigail dressed quickly in her travel-worn clothing, wishing she had something fresher to wear but grateful for the shelter she had found. Downstairs, she discovered Mrs. Torres preparing a substantial breakfast, and Ethan studying what appeared to be account books at the kitchen table. "Good morning," she greeted them. Suddenly shy in the bright light of day, Ethan looked up and a smile transformed his serious expression. "Miss Coleman, I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, taking the seat Mrs. Torres indicated. "And please call me Abigail." "Abigail," he repeated, and something about the way he said her name made her heart beat a little faster. Breakfast was a cheerful affair. Mrs. Torres shared stories about the ranch and the local community while keeping their plates filled with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Ethan spoke of his plans for the day, checking fence lines, moving cattle to a new pasture, meeting with a horse trader from a neighboring ranch. "I thought I might take you into town before noon," he said to Abigail. "Give you time to get a ticket for the afternoon train." "But I have no money," Abigail reminded him, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "My purse was stolen, remember?" Ethan waved away her concern. "I'll advance you the fare. You can repay me when you're settled with your aunt." "That's very generous," Abigail said, touched by his consideration. "I'll send the money as soon as I arrive in Santa Fe, I promise." "I'm not worried about it," Ethan assured her. "Besides, I need to go to town anyway. Need to talk to Sheriff Davis about that Wilkes gang we spotted last night. After breakfast, Mrs. Torres insisted on helping Abigail freshen up her travel dress, pressing out the worst of the wrinkles and mending a small tear in the hem. "You have skilled hands," Abigail observed as she watched the older woman work. Mrs. Torres smiled. "My mother was a seamstress. She taught me well." She glanced up at Abigail. "If you don't mind me asking, what will you do in Santa Fe?" "My aunt runs a millinery shop," Abigail explained. "She's offered me a position there. I have some experience with needlework, though nothing like your skill." "A good trade," Mrs. Torres nodded approvingly. "Steady work for a woman." By mid-morning, Abigail's dress was as presentable as it could be, and she was ready to depart. To her surprise, Ethan had harnessed a small buggy rather than saddling Juniper. "Thought this might be more comfortable for you," he explained when he saw her questioning look. "It's about a half-hour drive to town." The ride to town was pleasant, with Ethan pointing out features of the landscape and sharing stories about the area's history. Abigail found herself relaxing in his company, charmed by his quiet humor and extensive knowledge. "How did your family come to settle here?" she asked as they crested a hill that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. "My father fought in the Mexican-American War," Ethan explained. "Saw this land and fell in love with it. After the war, he came back, staked a claim, and started with just 20 head of cattle and a dream." Pride resonated in his voice. "By the time he died, we had one of the most successful ranches in the territory. And now you run it alone," Ethan nodded. "My brother William was killed during the war, the Confederate kind. My sister Mary married a railroad man and moved to Denver, so it's just me, Mrs. Torres, and a handful of ranch hands." "It must be lonely sometimes," Abigail observed. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, a brief glimpse of vulnerability that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "There's always work to be done," he said simply. "Not much time for loneliness." But Abigail sensed the truth behind his words. Despite the people around him, Ethan Eastwood was, in his own way, as alone as she was. The town of Silver Creek was larger than Abigail had expected, with a main street boasting several businesses, a general store, a bank, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other establishments. People bustled about their business, pausing occasionally to greet Ethan as he guided the buggy down the street. "Popular, aren't you?" Abigail teased. Ethan's cheeks colored slightly. "Small town, everybody knows everybody." Their first stop was the train depot, a more substantial building than the one at Rattlesnake Junction. Inside, Ethan purchased a ticket for the afternoon train to Santa Fe, handing it to Abigail with a smile. "One ticket to your new life," he said. Abigail carefully tucked the ticket into her carpetbag. "Thank you. I'll write to you with the money as soon as I arrive." Next, they visited the sheriff's office, where Ethan reported the Wilkes gang sighting. Sheriff Davis, a grizzled man with a perpetual scowl, took the information seriously. "Bastards hit the Silverton stage yesterday," he growled. "Shot the driver. He'll live, but it was a close call. I've got men tracking them, but they know the territory too well." "They were headed east when we spotted them," Ethan offered, "maybe 5 miles from my north pasture." The sheriff made a note. "Appreciate the information, Eastwood," Miss, he added with a nod to Abigail. After leaving the sheriff's office, Ethan suggested lunch at the hotel restaurant. Best fried chicken in the territory, he promised. The restaurant was clean and pleasant, with checkered tablecloths and windows that looked out onto the main street. A motherly waitress named Mabel greeted Ethan like an old friend. "And who is this lovely young lady?" she asked, eyeing Abigail with open curiosity. "Miss Abigail Coleman," Ethan introduced her. "She's traveling to Santa Fe this afternoon. Miss Coleman, this is Mabel Johnson. She makes the pies that keep me coming back to town." Mabel beamed. "Charmed to meet you, Miss Coleman. Any friend of Ethan's is welcome here." As they waited for their meal, Abigail noticed several people glancing their way, some with obvious curiosity, others with friendly smiles. A few women looked at her with particular interest. "I seem to be causing quite a stir," she commented quietly. Ethan followed her gaze and chuckled. "Don't mind them. It's just that I don't often come to town with a beautiful woman on my arm." The compliment, delivered so casually, caught Abigail by surprise. Heat rose to her cheeks, and she busied herself arranging her napkin to hide her reaction. The fried chicken lived up to Ethan's praise, crispy on the outside, tender and juicy within, served with creamy mashed potatoes and fresh green beans. For dessert, Mabel insisted they try her famous apple pie, still warm from the oven. "This is wonderful," Abigail said after her first bite of the cinnamon-scented dessert. "I haven't had pie this good since my mother's." "High praise indeed," Ethan said with a smile. "Mabel will be insufferable now." Their meal complete, Ethan suggested they had time to visit the general store before heading back to the depot. "You might want some provisions for your journey," he explained. At the general store, Ethan insisted on purchasing a small parcel of food for Abigail's trip: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a jar of Mrs. Torres's preserves. When Abigail protested, he brushed away her objections. "Consider it my contribution to your fresh start," he said. The store owner's wife, a friendly woman named Mrs. Baker, engaged Abigail in conversation while Ethan spoke with Mr. Baker about an order of supplies for the ranch. "So you're heading to Santa Fe?" Mrs. Baker asked. "Got family there, my aunt," Abigail confirmed. "She owns a millinery shop." "Ah, millinery, such delicate work. You have the hands for it, I can tell." Mrs. Baker studied Abigail thoughtfully. "Though I must say, it's a shame you're leaving so soon. We don't get many new faces in Silver Creek, especially not young ladies, and Ethan Eastwood is quite a catch, you know." Abigail blushed furiously. "Oh, no, it's not like that. Mr. Eastwood merely helped me when I was stranded. We barely know each other." Mrs. Baker winked. "Sometimes the best matches start that way, dear. My Henry and I met when he pulled me from a creek during a flash flood." Married 6 months later, and that was 30 years ago. Before Abigail could form a response, Ethan returned, and they took their leave of the Bakers. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its descent, signaling that it was time to return to the depot. The walk back was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Abigail found herself strangely reluctant for their time together to end. In just 24 hours, Ethan Eastwood had shown her more kindness than she had experienced in the months since her parents' deaths. At the depot, they found the platform already busy with passengers waiting for the train. Ethan secured Abigail a seat on a bench, then stood beside her, his tall figure providing shade from the afternoon sun. "Should be here within the hour," he said, consulting his pocket watch. "Right on schedule." "Thank you again for everything," Abigail said, looking up at him. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along last night." Ethan's blue eyes met hers, and something in their depths made her breath catch. "I'm glad I was there," he said simply. A whistle in the distance announced the approaching train. Around them, passengers began gathering their belongings, preparing to board. Abigail stood, smoothing her dress nervously. "Well, I suppose this is goodbye," she said, hating how formal her voice sounded. "I suppose it is," Ethan agreed, his expression unreadable. Then, as if making a sudden decision, he reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small card. Here's my direction for when you want to send that repayment. Abigail took the card, their fingers brushing briefly. I'll write as soon as I arrive, she promised. The train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and billowing steam. Doors opened, and passengers began disembarking as others prepared to board. Your carriage awaits, Miss Coleman, Ethan said with a small smile, picking up her carpetbag. He helped her navigate through the crowd to the nearest passenger car, where a conductor checked her ticket and directed her to an available seat. Ethan placed her carpetbag on the rack above, then stood awkwardly in the aisle. Safe travels, Abigail, he said, removing his hat briefly. I hope Santa Fe brings you happiness. Thank you, Ethan, she replied, surprised by the sudden tightness in her throat. For a moment, it seemed like he might say something more, but then the conductor called all aboard, and Ethan stepped back. Goodbye, Abigail said softly as he turned to leave through the window. She watched him walk back to the platform, his tall figure easy to distinguish in the crowd. The train lurched forward, beginning its journey, and Abigail felt an unexpected pang of loss as Ethan's figure grew smaller and finally disappeared from view. She settled back in her seat, the train's rhythm gradually becoming a soothing background to her thoughts. Opening her carpetbag to retrieve a book for the journey, she was surprised to find a small package wrapped in brown paper that hadn't been there before. Curious, she unwrapped it to reveal a beautifully carved wooden rose, the craftsmanship so fine that each petal seemed ready to unfurl. A small note accompanied it, something to remember the West by. E.E. Abigail traced the delicate carving with her fingertip, a smile curving her lips. Such a thoughtful gift. When had he placed it in her bag, during their stop at the general store, perhaps? She tucked the rose carefully back into her carpetbag, along with Ethan's card with his address. As the train carried her towards Santa Fe and her new life, Abigail found her thoughts repeatedly returning to the quiet cowboy who had rescued her from a night alone at the depot. There had been something special about Ethan Eastwood, a depth and kindness that had touched her in unexpected ways. Just a brief encounter, she told herself firmly. A kindness from a stranger, nothing more. But deep down, she knew it had been more than that. Something had sparked between them, a connection she hadn't felt with anyone before. And as the miles stretched between them, Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving something precious behind. The train journey to Santa Fe passed without incident. Abigail shared her compartment with a kindly older couple traveling to visit their daughter, and their pleasant conversation helped distract her from her conflicted feelings about leaving Silver Creek. Santa Fe proved to be larger and more established than she had expected, with a distinctive blend of Spanish and American influences evident in its architecture and culture. Her aunt, Margaret Coleman, greeted her at the station with warm embraces and exclamations over how grown-up she looked. "It's been too many years," Aunt Margaret declared as she ushered Abigail into a waiting carriage. "Not since you were 14, I believe. You've become quite the young lady." Aunt Margaret was her father's younger sister, a slender woman in her 40s with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the same green eyes that Abigail had inherited. Widowed young and childless, she had built a successful business and a comfortable life for herself in Santa Fe. The millinery shop, Coleman's Fine Hats, occupied the ground floor of a handsome building on the town's main avenue with living quarters above. Aunt Margaret showed Abigail to a pleasant bedroom overlooking a small courtyard garden. "This will be your space," she explained. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." "It's lovely," Abigail assured her, touched by her aunt's thoughtfulness in preparing the room with fresh flowers and new linens. That evening over dinner, Aunt Margaret outlined what Abigail's duties would be in the shop. "You'll start with simple tasks greeting customers, maintaining the displays, basic stitching work. As you learn the trade, you can take on more complex projects. I'm eager to learn," Abigail said sincerely, "and I want to earn my keep." "Nonsense," Aunt Margaret waved away the concern. "Your family, but I understand the desire to be useful. Your father had the same work ethic." Later, alone in her new room, Abigail unpacked her few possessions. When she came across the wooden rose Ethan had given her, she placed it carefully on her bedside table, running her fingers over the smooth petals one more time before preparing for bed. The next morning, she sat down to write 2 letters. The first was to a friend in Philadelphia, informing her of her safe arrival in Santa Fe. The second was to Ethan Eastwood. In this second letter, Abigail expressed her gratitude once more for his assistance and enclosed the money for her train ticket. She mentioned her safe arrival and described her first impressions of Santa Fe. After a moment's hesitation, she added, "The wooden rose you gifted me now sits beside my bed, a beautiful reminder of kindness found in unexpected places. I shall treasure it always." She signed the letter, sealed it with a drop of wax, and addressed it using the information on Ethan's card. Later that day, she posted both letters at the Santa Fe post office before returning to help her aunt in the shop. Days turned into weeks as Abigail settled into her new life. The millinery business proved interesting, and she discovered she had a natural talent for design. Her aunt was a patient teacher, and Abigail absorbed the techniques and traditions of hat-making with enthusiasm. Santa Fe society welcomed her warmly. As the niece of a respected businesswoman, Abigail received invitations to teas, suppers, and social gatherings. She made friends among the young women of the town and attracted the attention of several eligible bachelors. Yet despite the fullness of her days and the kindness of her new acquaintances, Abigail often found her thoughts drifting back to Silver Creek and a pair of blue eyes that had seemed to see into her very soul. She would catch herself daydreaming about what Ethan might be doing riding across his ranch lands, sharing a meal with Mrs. Torres, perhaps thinking of her as she thought of him. One afternoon, as Abigail was arranging a display of new summer hats, the bell above the shop door tinkled. She looked up with her customary welcoming smile, then froze in surprise. Mr. Eastwood. Ethan stood just inside the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat out of place among the feminine frippery of the millinery shop. He was dressed more formally than she had seen him before, in a clean dark suit and polished boots. His hair was neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved, but his eyes were the same piercing blue she remembered. "Miss Coleman," he greeted her, a smile breaking across his face. "I hoped I might find you here." What are you doing in Santa Fe?" Abigail asked, her heart racing inexplicably. "Business," Ethan replied, stepping further into the shop. "Cattle contract with the army, but I must admit that's not the only reason I came." Before Abigail could respond, Aunt Margaret emerged from the back room, curious about the male voice in her shop. "Aunt Margaret, this is Mr. Ethan Eastwood," Abigail introduced them. "He was kind enough to assist me when I was stranded during my journey here. Mr. Eastwood." "How wonderful to meet you," Aunt Margaret exclaimed, coming forward to shake his hand. "Abigail has told me about your gallantry. We are most grateful." "It was no trouble, madam," Ethan assured her. "Anyone would have done the same." "I think not," Aunt Margaret said with a knowing smile. "Please, won't you join us for dinner this evening? It's the least we can do to thank you properly." "I would be honored," Ethan accepted, his eyes finding Abigail's again with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. That evening, Abigail took special care with her appearance, selecting her best dress, a deep blue silk that brought out the green of her eyes, and arranging her chestnut hair in an elegant style. When Ethan arrived, promptly at 7, his appreciative gaze told her the effort had been worthwhile. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Aunt Margaret proving to be an excellent hostess. She drew Ethan out about his ranch, his family history, and his business interests while serving a delicious meal of roast chicken, fresh vegetables from her garden, and a berry tart for dessert. Abigail spoke little, content to watch and listen as Ethan relaxed in her aunt's welcoming presence. He had a quiet charm that she found increasingly appealing, and his occasional glances in her direction sent pleasant shivers through her. After dinner, Aunt Margaret suggested they retire to the parlor for coffee. Once they were settled, she suddenly remembered an urgent letter she needed to write and excused herself, leaving Abigail and Ethan alone. "Your aunt is very subtle," Ethan commented with a smile once Margaret had departed. Abigail laughed. "About as subtle as a charging bull, but she means well." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the distant sounds of the town outside. "I received your letter," Ethan finally said. "And the money, though that wasn't necessary." "Of course it was," Abigail insisted. "I always pay my debts." "Did you like the rose?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "It's beautiful," she assured him. "I've never seen such fine carving." "Did you make it yourself?" Ethan nodded, a flush of pride coloring his cheeks. "My father taught me, said a man should have something to occupy his hands during the long winter evenings." "You have talent," Abigail said sincerely. "True artistry." Another silence, this one charged with unspoken words. Ethan set his coffee cup aside and leaned forward, his expression serious. "Abigail, I need to be honest with you. My business with the Army could have been handled through agents. I came to Santa Fe because I wanted to see you again." His voice was steady, but she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you left." The confession sent a thrill through Abigail. "I've thought of you too," she admitted softly. "More than I should, perhaps." Ethan's face lit up with hope. "Then you wouldn't object if I called on you properly? With your aunt's permission, of course." "I would like that very much," Abigail said, her heart singing with unexpected joy. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of emotion for Abigail. Ethan's business with the Army was concluded within days, but he extended his stay in Santa Fe, taking rooms at the town's finest hotel. Each day, he would appear at the millinery shop around closing time to escort Abigail and her aunt home. In the evenings, they would go for walks through the town, attend local entertainments, or simply sit in Aunt Margaret's parlor talking for hours. Aunt Margaret observed their growing attachment with obvious approval. "He's a good man," she told Abigail one night after Ethan had departed. "Solid. Dependable, and he looks at you as if you've hung the moon and stars." "Do you think it's too soon?" Abigail asked, voicing the concern that had begun to nag at her. "We've known each other such a short time." "The heart knows what it wants," Aunt Margaret said wisely. "Your parents courted for just 6 weeks before they married, and they had 40 happy years together." As Ethan's departure date approached, Abigail found herself increasingly distressed by the thought of his leaving. They had grown so close, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes and dreams, their fears and sorrows. She had told him about her parents' deaths and the crushing loneliness that had followed. He had confided his guilt over not being with his father when he died, and his struggles to maintain the ranch in those early days after his loss. On their last evening together before his scheduled departure, Ethan took Abigail to dinner at the finest restaurant in Santa Fe. He seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous, as they were shown to a private table in a corner of the elegant dining room. "Is something wrong?" Abigail asked after they had ordered. Ethan took a deep breath, then reached across the table to take her hand. "Abigail, I've been doing a lot of thinking these past 2 weeks." "That sounds ominous," she teased, trying to lighten the sudden tension. "Not at all," he assured her with a small smile. "The opposite, in fact. I've been thinking about how meeting you has changed everything for me. Before, I was just existing working the ranch, doing what needed to be done, but not really living. You've brought light back into my world." Abigail felt tears prick her eyes at the sincere emotion in his voice. "You've changed things for me too," she whispered. "After my parents died, I felt so lost. You helped me find myself again." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "I know this may seem sudden. We've known each other barely a month. But sometimes, when something is right, you just know it." He paused, then continued. "I'm leaving tomorrow, and I can't bear the thought of going without telling you how I feel. I love you, Abigail Coleman." I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you sitting alone at that depot, trying so hard to be brave." Abigail's heart swelled with emotion. "Oh, Ethan," she breathed. "I love you too. I've been fighting it, telling myself it was too soon, but it's the truth." The joy that transformed Ethan's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Then marry me," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Come back to Silver Creek as my wife. Help me make Eastwood Ranch a true home again." For an instant, doubt flickered through Abigail's mind. Marriage, so soon? What about her position with Aunt Margaret, the life she was building in Santa Fe? But then she looked into Ethan's eyes and knew with absolute certainty that this was right. This was where she belonged with this strong, kind man who had rescued her in more ways than one. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you, Ethan Eastwood." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "My father gave it to me before he died, said to save it for when I found a woman worthy of it. I've been carrying it around since the day after you left Silver Creek." "It's beautiful," Abigail whispered, admiring how the diamond caught the light. "I'll treasure it always." They returned to Aunt Margaret's house that evening to share their news. Far from being surprised, Margaret seemed to have been expecting the announcement. "I thought as much when you asked to speak with me privately this afternoon," she said to Ethan with a knowing smile. "And of course you have my blessing, though I'll miss my niece and my best assistant." "You must come visit us," Abigail insisted, embracing her aunt. "Often, wild horses couldn't keep me away," Margaret promised. "Now, let's discuss the wedding. When were you thinking?" Ethan and Abigail exchanged glances. "As soon as possible," Ethan said. "I need to return to the ranch and I'd like to bring my bride with me." "Next week then," Margaret decided with the efficiency that had made her a successful businesswoman. Just enough time to arrange a proper ceremony and for Abigail to prepare her trousseau, and so it was settled. The next 7 days passed in a flurry of preparations. Aunt Margaret closed the shop for the week, devoting herself entirely to creating a suitable wedding for her only niece. Invitations were dispatched, a local minister engaged, and the town's best bakery commissioned to create a wedding cake. Abigail spent her days selecting fabric for new dresses suitable for ranch life and learning from Aunt Margaret all the domestic skills she would need as the mistress of Eastwood Ranch. In the evenings, she and Ethan would steal precious moments alone, planning their future together. "Mrs. Torres will be thrilled," Ethan told her. "She's been telling me for years that the ranch needs a woman's touch." "I hope I can live up to her expectations," Abigail said, suddenly nervous about taking on such responsibilities. "You'll exceed them," Ethan assured her. "Just be yourself." That's all anyone could ask. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, a perfect late summer day. The ceremony was held in Santa Fe's small but elegant church, filled with flowers and the warm wishes of the community that had embraced Abigail as one of their own. Aunt Margaret had arranged for a local musician to play the violin as Abigail walked down the aisle, radiant in a gown of ivory silk with delicate lace trim that she and her aunt had worked on together. Ethan waited at the altar, looking handsome and somewhat awestruck in his best suit. When he took her hand and repeated his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "I, Ethan James Eastwood, take thee, Abigail Rose Coleman, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance. And thereto I plight thee my troth." Abigail's own voice trembled slightly with emotion as she made the same promises, but her heart was certain. This was right. This was meant to be. The reception following the ceremony was held in Aunt Margaret's courtyard garden, transformed for the occasion with lanterns and ribbons. The entire town seemed to have turned out to celebrate with them, along with a few of Ethan's friends and business associates from Silver Creek who had made the journey. As evening fell, Abigail found a moment of quiet with her new husband, standing slightly apart from the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Eastwood?" Ethan asked, his arm around her waist. "Perfectly," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can hardly believe it's real. A month ago I was sitting alone in that depot, thinking my life was over before it had truly begun. And now? And now you're stuck with a rough cowboy and a hardscrabble ranch," Ethan finished with a chuckle. "No," Abigail corrected him softly. "Now I have the love of a good man and a place to call home. That's more than I ever dared hope for." Ethan's expression softened as he gazed down at her. "You know, when I found you at that depot, I told you you'd see home before the stars did. I didn't realize then that you would become my home." The following morning, the newlyweds bid farewell to Aunt Margaret and set out for Silver Creek. The journey was far more comfortable than Abigail's previous travel experience, with Ethan ensuring they had a private compartment on the train and the best rooms at the hotels where they stopped along the way. "You're spoiling me," Abigail protested after a particularly luxurious dinner during their second night on the road. "Get used to it," Ethan replied with a grin. "I have years of bachelor living to make up for." They arrived at Silver Creek Station on a golden afternoon 5 days after their wedding. News of their marriage had preceded them, and Abigail was touched to see a small group waiting on the platform to greet them Mrs. Torres, Sheriff Davis, the bakers from the general store, and several others she had met briefly during her previous visit. "Welcome home, Mrs. Eastwood," Mrs. Torres said warmly, embracing Abigail as they stepped off the train. "The ranch is ready for you." "Thank you, Mrs. Torres," Abigail replied, genuinely moved by the welcome. "I can't wait to see it again." The townsfolk had arranged a small impromptu reception at the hotel restaurant, where Mabel served her famous fried chicken and apple pie in honor of the occasion. Abigail was touched by the genuine warmth of the community's welcome and their obvious happiness for Ethan. "Never seen him smile so much," Sheriff Davis commented to Abigail at one point. "You're good for him, Mrs. Eastwood." By the time they finally set out for the ranch, the sun was beginning to set. Ethan drove the same buggy he had used during Abigail's previous visit, but now it was loaded with wedding gifts and Abigail's trunks. "Almost home," he said as they crested the hill that offered the first view of Eastwood Ranch in the distance. "Home," Abigail repeated, savoring the word. After months of uncertainty and grief, she finally had a place where she truly belonged. As they approached the ranch house, Abigail noticed something different about its appearance. Lanterns had been hung from the porch posts, casting a welcoming glow, and a large banner stretched across the front of the house. Read, "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Eastwood," in carefully painted letters. "Mrs. Torres has been busy," Ethan observed with a chuckle. Inside, the house had been transformed. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, new linens covered the furniture, and vases of wildflowers brightened every room. The master bedroom, which Ethan had occupied alone since his father's death, now featured a new quilt on the bed and feminine touches that made it suitable for a married couple. "You like it?" Mrs. Torres asked anxiously as she showed Abigail through the house. "I wanted everything to be perfect for you." "It's wonderful," Abigail assured her, touched by the older woman's thoughtfulness. "You've made it so welcoming." That night after Mrs. Torres had retired to her quarters and the ranch had settled into darkness, Abigail stood on the front porch with Ethan, looking up at the star-filled sky. "I've never seen so many stars," she marveled, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "In Philadelphia, the city lights dim them. Even in Santa Fe, they weren't this brilliant." "One of the things I love about this place," Ethan said, his arm around her shoulders, "makes a man feel small but in a good way. Reminds you that your troubles aren't as big as they seem." Abigail turned in his embrace to look up at him. "Are you happy, Ethan?" Truly, his answer was to kiss her, a tender meeting of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he whispered. "Welcome home, Mrs. Eastwood." The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery for Abigail. Ranch life was demanding in ways she had never experienced, with days that began before dawn and work that never truly ended. But she embraced the challenges with enthusiasm, determined to be a true partner to Ethan and an asset to the ranch. Mrs. Torres proved an invaluable guide, teaching Abigail the rhythms of ranch life and the skills she would need as its mistress. Under the older woman's patient tutelage, Abigail learned to manage the household accounts, preserve the bounty from the kitchen garden, and create meals that would satisfy hungry ranch hands. Ethan, for his part, took obvious pride in introducing his wife to the ranch operations. He taught her to ride properly, showed her the boundaries of their property, and explained the seasonal cycles of cattle ranching. Together, they visited neighboring ranches, where Abigail was warmly welcomed into the close-knit community of ranch wives. Their evenings were precious time alone together, where they continued to learn about each other and deepen their bond. Sometimes they would sit on the porch swing, talking about their day or making plans for the future. Other nights, they might read aloud to each other from one of the books in Ethan's surprisingly extensive library. And always, there were the quiet, intimate moments in their bedroom where they expressed without words the love that had grown between them. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the rich gold and crimson colors of the changing landscape, Abigail began to suspect a new blessing was on its way. Her monthly cycle, always reliable, had failed to appear. Her dresses felt slightly tighter around the waist, and certain foods that she had previously enjoyed now turned her stomach. She kept her suspicions to herself for several weeks, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely. But when the symptoms persisted, she finally shared her thoughts with Mrs. Torres, who confirmed what Abigail had begun to believe. She was with child. That evening, as they sat before the fire in the ranch house parlor, Abigail gathered her courage to share the news with Ethan. "I have something to tell you," she began, her hands nervously smoothing the fabric of her skirt. Ethan looked up from the ranch ledger he had been reviewing, his expression curious. "What is it, love? You've seemed preoccupied today." Abigail took a deep breath. "I believe that is Mrs. Torres and I both think," she paused, then decided to simply say it directly. "I'm going to have a baby, your baby, our baby." For a moment, Ethan simply stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then slowly, a smile spread across his features, the most radiant, joyful smile Abigail had ever seen on his face. "A baby," he repeated, setting aside the ledger and moving to kneel beside her chair. "Are you certain?" "As certain as we can be without a doctor's confirmation," Abigail said. "All the signs are there. If our calculations are correct, the baby should arrive in early spring." Ethan placed a gentle hand on her still flat abdomen, wonder written across his features. "A child," he whispered. "Our child." Then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious porcelain, his face buried in her hair. "Thank you," he murmured. "Oh, Abigail, thank you." The next months brought new challenges and joys. Abigail's body changed as the baby grew within her, and she had to adapt her activities to accommodate her increasing girth and occasional discomfort. Ethan became fiercely protective, insisting she rest more and hiring additional help for the household so that she wouldn't overexert herself. Christmas arrived, bringing with it Aunt Margaret, who had closed her shop for 2 weeks to visit her niece and help prepare for the coming baby. She arrived laden with gifts, baby clothes she had sewn herself, soft blankets, and a beautiful cradle that Ethan's ranch hands transported carefully from the train station. "The shop can manage without me for a while when the baby comes," she announced over Christmas dinner. "I wouldn't miss the birth of my grandniece or grandnephew for the world." Winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glistening wonderland. On clear nights, Ethan and Abigail would bundle up and walk outside to look at the stars, which seemed even brighter against the snow-covered ground. "Do you ever miss Philadelphia?" Ethan asked one such night as they stood with their arms around each other, gazing upward. Abigail considered the question thoughtfully. "I miss certain things," she admitted. "The libraries, the theaters, some of my childhood friends, but I don't miss the life I had there. This," she gestured to the ranch around them, "this is where I belong now, with you." February brought a violent blizzard that isolated the ranch for nearly a week. Abigail, now 7 months pregnant, found herself confined to the house, watching through frosted windows as Ethan and the ranch hands battled the elements to care for the cattle. "I've never seen a storm like this," she commented to Mrs. Torres as they worked together in the kitchen, preparing hearty meals for the men when they returned from their frigid labors. "The winter of '68 was worse," Mrs. Torres replied, kneading bread dough with practiced hands. "We lost nearly a third of the herd, and Senor Ethan's father nearly died trying to save them. But the spring that followed was the most beautiful I've ever seen, wildflowers everywhere, as if the land was apologizing for its harshness." The storm eventually passed, leaving behind pristine snowdrifts and a crystalline blue sky. The cattle had survived with minimal losses, thanks to Ethan's preparations and the dedication of his men. As spring approached, Abigail's time drew near. Her body felt ungainly and uncomfortable, the baby's movements sometimes keeping her awake at night. But there was joy, too, in feeling those first fluttering kicks, in watching Ethan's face as he felt their child move beneath his hand, in preparing the nursery that adjoined their bedroom. Dr. Harrison, Silver Creek's physician, began making weekly visits to the ranch as Abigail's due date approached. A gruff but kind older man, he assured her that everything was progressing normally. "First babies often take their time," he told her during one examination. "But you're young and healthy, Mrs. Eastwood. No reason to expect anything but a smooth delivery." Abigail's labor began on a mild April morning, just as dawn was breaking over the eastern hills. She awoke to a cramping sensation that quickly intensified, and her water broke as she attempted to rise from bed. "Ethan," she gasped, shaking her sleeping husband. "It's time." What followed was the most physically demanding experience of Abigail's life. Hours of increasing pain as her body worked to bring their child into the world. Ethan remained by her side throughout, wiping her brow with cool cloths, holding her hand through contractions, murmuring words of encouragement even as worry lined his face. Mrs. Torres and Aunt Margaret, who had returned to the ranch 2 weeks earlier in anticipation of the birth, worked alongside Dr. Harrison, providing the practical and emotional support Abigail needed. Finally, as the afternoon sun began to set, casting golden light through the bedroom window, Abigail gave one final, exhausting push, and their child slipped into the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," Dr. Harrison announced, lifting the squalling infant for them to see. "A fine, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Abigail's face as the doctor placed the swaddled newborn in her arms. Through her exhaustion, she felt a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tracing a finger over his tiny features, the button nose, the rosebud mouth, the wispy dark hair that already showed hints of his father's color. Ethan sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, his expression one of awe as he gazed at their son. "He's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. They named him James Thomas Eastwood, James for Ethan's father, Thomas for Abigail's. From the beginning, little James showed a strong personality, demanding attention with powerful lungs and developing a full head of dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. The first year of parenthood was a whirlwind of joy, exhaustion, and discovery. Abigail found herself constantly amazed by her son's development, his first smile, the way he began to recognize his parents, his determined efforts to roll over and eventually crawl. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, often carrying James with him around the ranch in a sling missus. Torres had fashioned, pointing out cattle and horses to the wide-eyed infant. In the evenings, he would read aloud to his son from the same books his own father had read to him, his deep voice soothing the baby to sleep. Life settled into new rhythms as the seasons turned once more. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Abigail bringing fresh ideas that complemented Ethan's experience. They expanded the kitchen garden into a proper orchard and vegetable plot, added dairy cows to provide milk and cheese, and even experimented with breeding horses, discovering that Abigail had a good eye for horseflesh. On the anniversary of their wedding, Ethan surprised Abigail with a special gift, a small desk of polished walnut placed in the sunniest corner of their bedroom. "For your writing," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth surface. "I've noticed you scribbling in that journal of yours in odd moments. Thought you might like a proper place to work." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Abigail had embraced him tightly. "How did I get so lucky?" she whispered against his chest. "I ask myself the same thing every day," Ethan replied, kissing the top of her head. As James's first birthday approached, Abigail found herself experiencing familiar symptoms once again: the missed monthly cycle, the slight nausea in the mornings, the tenderness in her breasts. This time she recognized the signs immediately. "Another baby?" Ethan asked when she shared her suspicions, his face lighting up with joy. "If my calculations are correct, he or she will arrive in the fall," Abigail confirmed. "James will be nearly too old enough to understand a little about having a sibling, I hope." Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose after both their mothers, was born on a crisp October day. Where James had his father's coloring, little Margaret was fair like Abigail, with a dusting of auburn hair and eyes that gradually changed from newborn blue to a clear green. Life on Eastwood Ranch continued to evolve as their family grew. The original ranch house was expanded to accommodate their increasing numbers, with a new wing added to provide more bedrooms and a dedicated schoolroom where Abigail began teaching the children their letters and numbers. Community gatherings became a regular feature of ranch life, with neighboring families coming together for barn raisings, harvest celebrations, and holiday feasts. Abigail's talent for organization and hospitality made Eastwood Ranch a natural center for such events. As the years passed, the ranch prospered beyond even Ethan's hopes. Careful breeding improved their cattle stock, and their experiments with horse breeding produced animals sought after throughout the territory. They added sheep to diversify their interests, and under Abigail's guidance, began a small but thriving wool business that supplemented their income during lean cattle years. James grew into a sturdy boy with his father's love of the land and his mother's quick intelligence. By the age of 10, he was already a capable horseman and showed a natural talent for working with the cattle. Margaret, 2 years his junior, revealed an artistic streak, spending hours drawing the landscape and animals of the ranch with remarkable accuracy for a child her age. Their family expanded once more when Abigail gave birth to twins William and Elizabeth 5 years after Margaret's arrival. The household became a bustling center of activity, filled with children's laughter, the comings and goings of ranch hands, and the steady rhythms of rural life. Through it all, the bond between Ethan and Abigail only deepened. The passion of their early marriage matured into a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and an abiding love that weathered the inevitable challenges of life: drought seasons that threatened the herd, financial setbacks when cattle prices fell, the tragic loss of Mrs. Torres to pneumonia after she had been part of their family for so many years. On the evening of their 15th wedding anniversary, Ethan and Abigail stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set in a blaze of color over the western hills. 15 years, Ethan mused, his arm around his wife's waist. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you sitting alone in that depot. Other times it feels like you've always been part of my life. Abigail leaned into his embrace, still finding the same comfort in his strength that she had all those years ago. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden by that night? Ethan shook his head. I believe some things are meant to be. If not that night, we would have found each other some other way. Such a romantic, Abigail teased, though she secretly cherished his sentiment. Only with you, he replied, bending to kiss her softly. From the yard, their children's voices rose in a game of tag, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The ranch buildings stood solid and well-maintained around them, testament to years of hard work and careful stewardship. In the corrals, horses moved with easy grace, while cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. This was the home they had built together, from that first uncertain meeting at a lonely train depot to the thriving ranch and family that surrounded them now. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars Ethan had promised would guide her home all those years ago, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. In the years that followed, Eastwood Ranch continued to flourish, becoming one of the most respected properties in the territory. Their children grew into capable, kind-hearted adults who carried forward the legacy their parents had built. And through it all, Ethan and Abigail remained each other's anchors, their love a beacon that guided them through life's joys and sorrows. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Abigail would take out the wooden rose Ethan had given her so long ago, its delicate petals still perfect after all these years. It served as a reminder of how their story began with an act of kindness at a darkened depot, and a promise that she would see home before the stars did. That promise had been kept, in ways neither of them could have imagined on that fateful evening. For Abigail had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of the man who had rescued her and in doing so had rescued himself as well.